An interview with Michele LaFrance. When emailing Dr. LaFrance for a possible interview for this project, I wrote, "My grandmother, Erminia, was robbed of her childhood and her education as a girl in Texas in the early 1930s. She was a woman ahead of her time. Reading now of the mujerista theory, I'm reminded of her determination and drive despite her lack of formal education. A devout Catholic who was married to my grandfather for almost 70 years, she was my biggest supporter and most valuable teacher during my divorce. While both of us clearly embrace equity and advancement for women, I've never considered myself a feminist, and I don't believe she did either. I'm not even sure that she would adopt mujerista. I've had the opportunity to read some of your work in this area, and I hoped you might have availability for a 30 to 40-minute interview. I would love to hear your thoughts and findings on the rhetorical implication of the word feminism. With the advent of mujerista and womanism, is feminism an inclusive enough term, or is it one that is better suited to academia as an umbrella, with the community/culturally relevant term being used in outreach? Or do we lead by actions and initiatives without labeling it, like my grandmother?" I was pleased to receive the following response from Dr. LaFrance. "I'm afraid you've caught me at a very busy time, and I've had difficulty responding to email as quickly as I would like. I hope my slowness in responding has not set your project back. I was charmed and intrigued by your letter. I'm happy to talk with you more. I also wonder, would you be interested in turning our interview into a dialogue that we might then publish in one of the field's journals? That may not be something you're interested in or have time for, and indeed, my time is stretched thin, but if you do have time and interest, I would love to see your story and your grandmother's story told. You are asking important questions." As a result of our exchange, I was able to have a very robust conversation with her that I cannot begin to cover here. Upon forwarding our Zoom recording, the accompanying note she wrote said, "Once you're in a good place with your work for this semester, let's talk about how we make this dialogue into a piece that speaks to your questions. You can be first author and help us determine where we send the piece and what it looks like when complete." This is what feminism looks like, right? All for one and one for all? Not so fast. When we hear the term feminism, we often think of fighting for equity for all women. But historically, it looks more like this. I talked to Dr. LaFrance about feeling disconnected from the term and actually shocked when I was called a feminist last summer for the first time. My surprise at being labeled a feminist led me to examine why I don't identify as one when my personal ideals are very much in line with feminist ideology. With the advent of the mujerista movement in Latinx communities and womanism in Black communities, I wondered if feminism is facing an inclusivity problem and what might be at the root. Movements seeking equity ideally should be seeking equity for all. The obvious divide with feminism found me talking to Dr. Michele LaFrance, critical feminist ethnographer and professor of feminist methodologies at George Mason University. Michele LaFrance spoke to the challenges of inclusivity facing feminism. Dr. LaFrance cites the peripheral role that dismantling white supremacy has played in feminist practice. Because of this, many women of color do not feel welcome in the movement. Second, Dr. LaFrance says that, quote, "white feminism is closely intertwined with girl boss corporate politics, which is bullshit," unquote. This intertwining also serves to disenfranchise women of color as well as low-income white women. There are so many women who, like me, live and believe in feminist principles, but don't identify with that image. So, in the end, should feminism stay or should it go? Dr. LaFrance says it's not her place to say. As a white woman, she identifies with feminism and does not feel the need to save it from itself. At the same time, she is sensitive to the feelings of students and colleagues who feel excluded, as this is a very real and valid perspective. In the end, she said, we should not look at dismantling, but creating a place where we can stand united. As LeVar Burton used to say at the end of Reading Rainbow, but you don't have to take my word for it. Click on the play button to see and hear this portion of my interview with Dr. LaFrance. As we discussed the divides that exist within feminism, I couldn't help but draw parallels to the research I've done on the Delano grape strike and the work of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Robert Greene, author of 48 Laws of Power, says, defeat them in detail. The divide and conquer strategy. Look at the parts and determine how to control the individual parts. Create dissension and leverage it. Deplorable working conditions and slightly more than slave wages were made possible by growers creating dissension between Filipino and Mexican farm workers and leveraging it. It wasn't until the workers united that the growers were forced to address the human and labor rights disaster they had created and benefited from for decades. I couldn't help but wonder if this divide is systemic as well. Dr. LaFrance calls it the neoliberal way. First, divide and conquer, then by privileging a few and penalizing the rest, the divide can be maintained, as it is typically unlikely the privileged will stand in opposition to their own best interest in favor of uniting against those who've provided the privilege. If you'd like to hear more of Dr. LaFrance's thoughts on systemic division, click the play button. Embracing privilege as change. After an embattled history, why keep feminism? Dr. LaFrance noted that while feminism as a label and a movement may not be perfect, it has undeniably helped us get this far. And she holds hope that it may get us to where we're going. That perhaps, as we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, the movement that ultimately unites us may be standing on the shoulders of feminism, strengthened by lessons learned from the past as we move forward together. Ultimately, Dr. LaFrance said she is a feminist, and the term feminism is one she wants to keep. Not unlike your big sister protecting you from the schoolyard bully, feminism forced disgusting behavior as recent as the 1980s, when she tells a story of being openly groped at a bus stop as standard fare for women, into the light. It forced society to look at the objectification of women, as well as the overtly sexualized terms, topics, and tone found acceptable when speaking to women. Is feminism redeemable? Who knows? But it did help us get to where we are. It also gave community and voice to those who would have otherwise shrunk themselves. Hear Dr. LaFrance discuss embracing the privilege of feminism to effect change by clicking on the play button. Thank you so much for the opportunity to interview Dr. LaFrance, as well as watching my presentation. as a result of this presentation and the conversation that Dr. LaFrance and I had, she has invited me to co-author to turn our